Alrighty, so let's go ahead and let's get started, guys. Don't want to take too much of you guys' time. It's gonna be a quick class, just basically getting you guys back up to speed with old emissions and five gas analysis. For those of you guys that don't know me, my name is Oscar Gomez. I'm the founder, director, and lead instructor at Master Automotive Training here in the great city of Rancho Cucamonga in Southern California. Back a little bit about my story, so we're not complete strangers. I've been in the automotive industry way too long. I started in the industry probably when I was about 15, 16 years old, and it wasn't something that I actually wanted to do. It was more I was forced to do it. Being raised by two immigrants, my parents were both immigrants from Mexico. You know, we were instilled with the work ethic that you just got to work, and then die. So when I was forced into it, I wasn't really sure about what I wanted to do. And then I was fortunate enough to actually attend Smog checks training here in the state of California. If you guys are aware, in California, we do emissions testing. So I attended Smog school, and my instructor, which I consider my mentor and call my mentor, Mr. Don Wilson, was able to inspire me to do a lot more than just turn wrenches in the automotive industry. He helped me obtain my ASCs, A6, A8, L1, just the minimum requirements, got through the California state approval process, became a licensed instructor here in the state of California, began teaching, kept working at the shop, and then became an ASC master tech, and just kept working from there. At this point, I hold about 18 ASCs, multiple certifications here with the state of California, multiple licenses with the state of California, a few federal licenses. So I always wanted to make sure that I'm able to give back to the industry that's been so great to me. And I feel this is one of the best ways to do it. Here at Master Automotive Training, we believe in bettering the automotive industry one technician at a time, and that starts with you. So we appreciate with you guys being on here today, because this information we put together, and we consider this very basic class. If you guys already have some sort of emissions background, emissions training, this class is just going to add to that. I consider this so basic that anybody can understand it. So I broke it down to that extent. So this way, if this is your first time being introduced to emissions, it's not going to be complicated. If you've already seen emissions, this is also going to help you as a refresher. But then also there might be that one thing that you pick up that's going to help you with your diagnostic strategy. So if you guys do see that, excuse me, not if you guys see that, but if you guys see anything or something doesn't make sense, go ahead and put in the comment section, and then I'll in the chat section, and then I'll go ahead and take a look at it at that for you guys as well. This way we can see how we can help you guys. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so I like to have some fun here. So the first thing is what's cleaner? Is it diesel exhaust or a cigarette? So some of the things that I look into is like, okay, what else can create emissions? Not just diesel exhaust, gas exhaust. What else creates emissions? So what do you guys think is cleaner, diesel exhaust or a cigarette? Oops. One sec here. All right, and if you guys said diesel exhaust, you are spot on. So if you guys can see here, these two smaller humps on the left-hand side, which are from a diesel exhaust, both of those are a lot smaller than everything else. So this right here is an indication that the diesel exhaust is actually a lot cleaner than one puff of one cigarette. So we should actually be emissions testing more of the cigarettes that we're selling out in the public more than anything else. So as an instructor, as a technician myself, I've always talked about specialty training. And what I mean by that is I'm always telling my students, and I'm telling fellow technicians, is you guys got to have some sort of specialty training. And what I mean by that is that's what's going to differentiate you between you and a mechanic and a technician. So there's nothing wrong with being a mechanic. There's guys, we need you guys. That's doing all the mechanical work, brakes, suspension, engines, and all that fun stuff. But what specialty training helps us and helps you guys is you guys are able to not only increase your value and make more income, but it's also going to put you on a different level. And by that, I mean is your diagnostic abilities are going to be a lot better. If you guys, if anybody asks me what my specialties are, my three specialties are emissions, engine performance, and electrical. Can I do everything else? Absolutely. Do I want to? Not really. But the reason that I have those three specialties is because that's what I focus all my energy on. So when it comes time for me to select classes for training, it needs to fit those three areas. So you guys should be able to decide what your specialty is, what are you good at, and what do you want to be good at. Try it out. And if you like it and it sticks, then make it one of your specialties. Okay. Obviously, if you're in a shop, well, and you're not the owner, you're going to have to be doing a lot of different jobs around the shop, which is okay. If you are the owner and you have technicians who are doing a lot of the mechanical work and you just want to be the specialty guy, no, go for it, okay? Because that's the best thing that we can possibly do. So today we're going to be talking about emissions, which I consider a specialty training. I was lucky enough to start in the industry when carburetors were still around. So I was able to work on a lot of carburetors, a lot of carburation. I got to use a 4-gas analyzer, a 5-gas analyzer, the big box scopes. So I got to use all that fun stuff. And I see that a lot of technicians nowadays don't want to use any of that equipment because they say it's antiquated. It's too old. We can't be using that, yada, yada, yada. But at the same time, is what people don't realize is that that equipment still plays a role today. So if you guys are able to know how to use a 5-gas analyzer, you can diagnose any car. At the end of this training, I'm going to share with you guys a quick video that I did on my TikTok on one of my personal vehicles, which is a 2014 Scion XP. It was a high fuel consumption situation, and I used a 5-gas analyzer to figure it out. No codes, nothing present. Data showed. We'll get there. All right. So I'll be able to show you guys how I was able to diagnose it simply using a 5-gas analyzer. So it's pretty cool. All right. So remember, you guys need to find your specialty, get your specialty, and then become a specialist within that specialty. Like ASE has the L1 advanced level specialist, because that makes you a specialist in diagnosing. Okay. So get your specialty. And if you guys want, let me know what you want your specialty to be. And then I'll keep tabs on you. I'll keep pushing you until you get it. All right. So let's continue from here. All right. So tonight's learning objectives. First, we want to find out what is smog. When we're talking about smog, what is it? See, most people, when they ask me, hey, what do you do? Oh, I'm an emissions instructor, or sometimes they'll say I'm a smog instructor. They're like, smog? You work at a smoke shop? No, smog comes out of your tailpipe. We're going to talk about what goes in versus what goes out. We're going to talk about how emissions are created, a little bit about oxidation and reduction, and then we're going to do some quick case studies on some 5-gas diagnosing. So let's go ahead and get cracking. The first one is, what is smog? So when you guys are looking at smog, what we're actually looking at is a couple of elements put together. The first one is hydrocarbons. When we're talking about hydrocarbons is fuel. So whatever's in your gas tank is HC. So hydrocarbons with NOx, or oxides of nitrogen, in the presence of sunlight create photochemical smog. So what you guys are seeing in this picture right here, all this gray cloud that you guys are looking at is actually smog. Okay, that's not a cloud. We did suffer from a pretty bad pandemic about 2 years ago, and during that whole situation, while everybody was at home, I walked outside and I could see nice and clear up to the mountain range. So that was showing me that there's no cars. There's no cars on the road. There's no cars putting out HC and NOx out of the tailpipe, and they weren't creating smog. And then slowly, as cars started getting back on the road, I could see it right now out of my office window. Okay, so smog is hydrocarbons, NOx in the presence of sunlight. We're going to talk a little bit about NOx as an emission composition in a little bit here. So if you're not sure what NOx is, don't sweat it. We're going to get there. Okay. All right. So in order for us to be able to understand how emissions are created, first we need to understand what the triangle of fire is. So anytime we have a situation where there's a fire, there's 3 things that need to be there in order for that fire to be existent. And those 3 things are heat, oxygen, and some sort of fuel or hydrocarbons. Okay. So if I want to start a fire, I need to have some sort of fuel source, which would probably be wood or some starting fluid, heat source, which would more than likely come from a match, and oxygen. Okay. So if I have those 3 elements, I'm going to be able to sustain a fire. Okay. Now, when it comes to an internal combustion engine, we add a fourth element. We have oxygen, so an internal combustion engine intake valve opens, allows oxygen and hydrocarbons, so that's two of the three elements. We compress that together, and then after we compress it, we ignite it. So we give it a heat source, right? So right now, I just gave you guys that fourth one. So inside of an engine, the way it changes is we add compression, okay? If you guys have taken any type of secondary ignition analysis class, you guys have heard of a term called conductivity. In order for us to have a ignition event or spark to jump the gap inside of a cylinder, we need to have good conductivity. And that conductivity is helped be created using compression. So we need good amount of compression in order for us to have the atomization of air and fuel so we can have spark travel through the cylinder and actually ignite it. Okay, so always remember that anytime we're talking about emission analysis or emission composition, we need to have those four elements, which is oxygen, fuel, compression, and some sort of ignition source. Okay, have you guys ever run into a car that comes in, has a little bit of pinging or some detonation? Back in the old days, the carburetor days was dieseling. And a lot of times this would happen because we had an unwanted heat source, usually known as carbon. So one of the things you guys can remember is when you're doing a barbecue, or for us Hispanics, a carne asada, you guys have charcoal that's warming up. Saludos, Inge. Has some charcoal that's warming up, okay? And that's what's going to be creating the heat in order for the rest of the charcoal in the grill to actually warm up. Okay, so inside of a combustion engine, if we have 10,000s of carbon buildup and that thing is glowing hot, when fuel and air enters the combustion chamber, that's going to ignite it. Okay, so we always need to keep that in mind every time that we're looking at emission composition and emission analysis and diagnosis. So in order for in order for us to understand what is going to come out of the tailpipe, we need to look at what comes in. So anytime we're talking about a four-stroke engine is going to be. So let's go ahead and get going here. Just like I was saying before, my computer decided to turn off on me. Always remember that you have 86% hydrogen and 16% carbon entering the combustion chamber. That's going to be your fuel. And then we're going to have 21% oxygen and 79% nitrogen that's going to be entering the actual combustion chamber. As that air comes into the combustion chamber, we're allowing that in through the intake valve. And as the piston descends, creates vacuum and then brings that into the actual cylinder. If it's a GDI vehicle, well, obviously the fuel is going to be entering later. If we're injecting it into the actual combustion chamber, it's not going to be drawn in through the intake valve unless you got a Toyota with the 2DI system, I believe. Okay, so why do we need compression? Why do you guys believe we need compression inside of a cylinder? You guys remember the 4 strokes of a 4-stroke engine, intake compression. Why do we need that compression event? So one of the reasons why we need good compression is we need to be able to atomize the air and fuel mixture in order for us to be able to burn it properly. What we do is as the air fuel comes in, both valves are closed, piston comes up and compresses the air fuel mixture. That allows us and gives us a better opportunity to be able to ignite it with our spark plug once the plug actually comes into TDC and fires it and creates the power stroke. This is why when an engine has low compression, you guys are going to see that you have misfires, you have high HCs or unburned fuel coming out of the tailpipe. And the reason being is because you're not compressing it properly. Also, too, for those of you guys that have ever taken a secondary ignition waveform analysis class, whenever an engine is low on compression, your KV drops, but then your burn time gets longer. And the reason why is because we have less compression, so we need to keep it on longer in order to burn the air fuel mixture within the combustion chamber. When we're talking about emissions, we always remember that whatever we get in, we're going to convert some of that and send it out of the tailpipe. So as the engine breathes, it breathes in nitrogen and oxygen, and it breathes in hydrogen and carbon. After it gets compressed and ignited, we create some other gases. The first one is H2O, water. So if you guys notice, there's droplets of water coming out of the exhaust of your car. Those small droplets are what is produced during internal combustion. Okay, the old rule of thumb is you're going to do 1 gallon of water for every 1 gallon of fuel that you burn. Would I recommend that you sit there and measure it? Absolutely not. But that's one test you can actually do. Would you want to do it? No, we don't have time for that, right? Then you might have some hydrocarbons left over. Some fuel didn't get properly burned. So that means you're going to have some HCs coming out of the tailpipe. Carbon's going to combine with oxygen, giving us carbon dioxide, okay? We're also going to have, when we don't have enough oxygen to create carbon dioxide, we're going to create carbon monoxide, the poisonous gas. Then we're going to have some oxygen left over, and then we're going to have either 1, 2, or 3 oxygen molecules that attach to nitrogen, forming NOx, NOx. The X stands for 1, 2, or 3 oxygen molecules attached to nitrogen, okay? And that creates NOx. Now we know what goes in, and then here's just a quick review of what comes out. What comes out of the tailpipe, we're going to have some hydrogen that combines with oxygen to form H2O. Okay, we're going to have some water. We're going to have some fuel that isn't consumed, leaving some hydrocarbons. There's going to be some oxygen that combines with carbon to form carbon dioxide. When not enough oxygen to form CO2, we're going to create carbon monoxide. That's a poisonous gas, and unfortunately, this is why you should not fall asleep in your car with your car running. Oxygen will be left over, and then nitrogen will combine with 1, 2, or 3 oxygen molecules to form oxides of nitrogen. So now let's take a look at what to expect. We're going to do a quick breakdown on some of these emission gases and just a general number, so this way you guys know how much you should expect. So when we're talking about CO2, CO2 is one of our efficiency indicators. Okay, if you guys were taught efficiency indication when it came to emission diagnosing or in any type of emissions class, CO2 is measured in percentage. The higher, the better. Okay, so CO2 is one of our efficiency indicators, and CO2 is a good indicator for me for engine efficiency. How well is this engine actually compressing and creating power? Okay, we're able to see that just with CO2. CO2, you want to see roughly between 13 and 15%. And low CO2 indicates an engine mechanical problem, a fuel problem, or a ignition misfire. So just by seeing CO2, that's an automatic indication that you might have a problem within the engine. The next emission we're going to be talking about is our second efficiency indicator, known as oxygen. So oxygen measures the catalytic converter efficiency. CO2 measures the engine's efficiency to properly compress and create CO2. Oxygen, on the other hand, is going to tell you how well is your catalytic converter operating. Okay, so oxygen, we usually see them around 0, and that's what we want to see. If O2 is high, then that would indicate a lean condition or a misfire. Lean condition, we don't have enough fuel, or we have a misfire where fuel isn't being burned due to lack of compression, fuel, or an ignition event. Okay, so O2 and CO2 put together give you guys a bunch of diagnostic information about what's going on with the car. From there, we start going into our actual measured gases. So here in California, we do not measure CO2 and O2 for an emissions test. We do measure HC, CO, and NOx. Can't speak for other states because I'm not aware how other states run their program. But in California, CO2 and O2 are not measured. However, HC, CO, and NOx are. So hydrocarbons is measured in parts per million, or ppm. HC measures the raw fuel in the exhaust, and it should be about 50 ppm or less. Most newer cars that I've dyno tested, and by new I mean 6 years, around 6 years from new, from today, were in the 0 mark. And high HCs along with high O2 and low CO2 indicates to you having ignition misfire. Okay, so using the 5-gas analyzer helps us and saves us a bunch of time because we're able to determine what's happening simply by looking at the emissions that are coming out of the tailpipe. And I always get told that this is old technology and it's a waste of time. Funny thing is the people that are telling me this are the ones that are wasting 5, 6, 7 hours swapping coils, injectors, and all that fun stuff, and talking about how using a 5-gas analyzer is a waste of time. If you have high hydrocarbons and CO2 and O2 are roughly equal, and what I mean by that is, let's say CO2 is at 10 and your O2 is roughly around 3 to 4, okay, and then you have high HCs with it, those three pieces are telling you got a mechanical problem, okay? That means that your O2 has gone up, your CO2 has dropped, okay, and then your HCs are high. That's telling you have a misfire. CO2 is verifying it, and then O2 is also verifying it. So you know for sure you got a mechanical problem. So at that point, you can either request more diagnostic time for in-cylinder waveform analysis, compression testing, and all that fun stuff, or whatever test you need to run. RC tests you should probably done before that anyhow. The next emission would be our carbon monoxide, CO. So this is not really a big problem right now. It was more when we had carburetors. So during carburation, carburetors were roughly between 0.5% to 1% carbon monoxide, and then it slowly started coming down, 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 and down. So carbon monoxide is measured in percentage. So CO would be a percent. So if I see 0.5 CO, that's telling me that that vehicle is burning 0.5%. Excuse me, not burning, but you have 0.5% of carbon monoxide left after internal combustion. So that would mean to me that we had not enough oxygen to make CO2, so we created CO. So this means that we have too much fuel, okay? So CO is created when there's not enough oxygen to create CO2. It should be about 0, and low CO usually means a lean condition, and high CO means a rich condition. Okay, so you usually want to see somewhere around 0 on your cars. If it's carbureted, obviously it's going to be a little bit different. So the next one would be oxides of nitrogen, or NOx. We abbreviate it NOx. That's also measured in ppm, and NOx is created when nitrogen heats up and expands. So nitrogen is one of those gases that us technicians kind of don't like, because with temperature and pressure changes, nitrogen will actually change. So if temperature goes up, nitrogen expands. If compression goes up, if pressure goes up, it expands and heats up. So that's why with NOx, anytime our combustion chamber gets hotter than 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit is when we lose control of NOx. That's when we use systems like the EGR, or we use VVT advancements to simulate an EGR and then help us reduce the temperature and pressure inside of the combustion chamber during an internal combustion engine event. All right, so those are the emissions. Now let's talk about a little bit about catalytic converters. So if we're talking about emissions, we know that emissions all end up inside a giant metallic filter that sits on the exhaust of our cars, known as the catalytic converter. So the catalytic converter has two beds within it. We have the oxidation bed and the reduction bed. The first bed that it's going to run into would be our reduction bed. So the reduction bed stores oxygen, and the oxygen is removed from NOx, or oxides of nitrogen. Only nitrogen leaves the converter at that point, and then our reduction bed basically becomes an oxidation bed at that point, because it's storing oxygen for us for the next event. And for the next event, what I mean is as more moves through, then it's going to be attaching itself to those gases coming through the exhaust. So the remaining oxygen acts as an oxidation bed, and it helps create CO2 whenever you have carbon monoxide that comes in to that first bed. So when you're talking about the catalytic converter in the reduction bed, since we're going to have some oxygen molecules left over, as carbon monoxide, the poisonous gas, comes through, you'll have an oxygen molecule that's just hanging around attached to it, forming more CO2. The next bed inside of a catalytic converter would be the oxidation bed. So the oxidation obviously means adding oxygen to. So anytime you hear the word oxidation, all you're really referring to is adding oxygen or an element of oxygen to something else. The oxidation bed helps us reduce HC and CO. O2 is added to CO, or carbon monoxide, to help us create carbon dioxide. This is why we always look at our efficiency indicator known as CO2. O2 is also added to hydrogen, and we add 2 oxygen molecules to hydrogen, and we form water. Okay, so that comes out of the oxidation bed within the catalytic converter. So the next thing I have right here, this is our air-fuel mixture chart. As a smog technician, that when I started my automotive career, this was a really helpful chart for me, because this was actually helping me keep in mind how our emissions were changing, and if one emission changed, how would it affect the other? Now, I really don't teach this chart. I teach more of the lambda side. Lambda is a European version of how to be able to tell air-fuel control. However, with lambda, we're able to have better control because it's based off of the emission output, not off of stoichiometry air to fuel ratio. Okay, so this is a little bit different with when it comes to lambda. So looking at this chart here, notice how carbon dioxide peaks right at 14.7 to 1. Carbon monoxide is going to be almost at its lowest point at stoichiometric. Hydrocarbons is at its lowest point, or our raw fuel. Oxygen is roughly at its lowest point there. And then NOx, well, obviously, we're in control of it, meaning we can still control it because our air-fuel mixture is correct. And when we have proper air-fuel mixture, that means that our catalytic converter is going to be efficiently doing its job because we're going to be able to warm it up and have it work because we're feeding it what it needs in order for it to do its job. One of the other things that we need in order to have good air-fuel ratio would be a good oxygen sensor or an air-fuel ratio sensor. So here I have a screenshot or a lab scope shot of an oxygen sensor. Okay, this is a narrow band sensor, so this would be your normal zirconia type sensor, 0 to 1 volt. And what we're looking at here is we're looking at the change. We want to make sure that that oxygen sensor goes from lean to rich, and we want to see at about 2,000 RPM a good frequency of maybe between 1 to 3 to 4 hertz, but it can go up to 10 depending on the actual vehicle. You guys can notice I'm using a snap-on scope here, and we're at 5 seconds for the entire screen capture here. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4 events. So we're roughly about 1.5 hertz because hertz is a measurement of how many times the signal repeats within 1 second. Okay, so we want to make sure that our oxygen sensors are operating properly because if not, we're not going to have a good operating cat. One thing you guys want to keep in mind is that the vehicle does have a AFR or a wideband O2 in the front. We really aren't using those anymore for fuel adjustment. We're actually using the rear O2 as our final fuel adjustment. Okay, so keep that in mind in case you guys run into a vehicle that you are trying to diagnose and is being a little picky. All right, so from here, I'm going to go ahead and jump into some case studies real quick with you guys before we finish this off. So that's why you guys can get a chance to take a look at some of this information. All right, so taking a look here, we have a 1993 Mazda Protege 1.8 manual transmission, no EGR. Customer's complaint is an erratic idle. So before we did anything, we did a baseline test. I'm not sure about you guys, but I was always taught for emission diagnosing, you start a baseline test. And what that means is you're going to rerun the vehicle, rerun the whole test. This way you have your emissions or your printout that you can reference off of. Don't trust the last Smog guy who did it. You don't know if he did it properly. Did he warm up the car? All that fun stuff. Always do a baseline so this way you guys know where you're at. So we did a baseline on this vehicle. Notice how this vehicle failed for hydrocarbons. Didn't fail for carbon monoxide. CO2 is at 16%. NOx is at 195 ppm. And O2 is at 1%. Okay, the key thing here is that the vehicle has an erratic idle. So whenever you have a car that has an erratic idle, what are some of the things that you guys would probably look at? If it's a 93, well, obviously we're not going to have any code data. Any PIDs, any live data. So there's not much we can be able to see from the actual computer side. But if you guys have a newer car, obviously put your scanner in, go to some live data. And if I have an erratic idle, one of the first tests I would do is raise the idle to about 2,000 RPM and then look at long-term and short-term fuel trims. If those trims begin to change at a higher RPM, that's telling me I got a vacuum leak. Okay, so an erratic idle, a lot of times could be a vacuum leak, could be a mass airflow, or could just be bad air-fuel ratio or timing. Okay, so this is a chart that I use in my classes and I hand out to my students. Whenever we have a condition that has a rough idle, and these are some of the emissions we would be looking at. So we go back 186, 0.43, 16, and 1095. So this would be about here. And this is telling us it's lean. And this could be ignition, primary, secondary, or vacuum leak. Interesting. We'll keep that in mind. So after the first repair, which wasn't done by any of us, Vehicle came back, we reran the test, and then this is what we saw. Excuse me. This was done by us. So this vehicle was actually tested. We did a smoke machine test on it. We found it had a leaking intake manifold gasket. We did an intake manifold gasket and then check out our emissions afterwards. HCs are 74, COs at 0.21, CO2 is at 15.5, NOx is at 300, and O2 is at 0.08. So that unmetered air that we were getting because of the intake vacuum of the intake leak or the vacuum leak was causing the vehicle to actually increase in emissions. And more than likely, this was probably happening because the O2 sensor was picking up all that extra oxygen and then just started dumping fuel to compensate for a quote-unquote lean condition. All right. So here's another one that we're going to be taking a look at. This is a 1996 Jeep Grand Cherokee. It has 131,130 miles. It's a 4.0. It's not a V6, it's a straight 6. It's an automatic PCV, EVAP, CAT, spark control, no DTCs. We did a dyno test on this. So this vehicle failed for NOx, and it failed for NOx only at 15 miles an hour. So our emissions test here in the state of California applies a 50% load at 15 miles an hour. So this engine was under extreme conditions while it was running at 15. So since the engine was severely loaded at 15 miles an hour with 810 NOx, with a cut point of 510, so we're only about 300 above, not too shabby. Okay, CO2 looks pretty good. It's at 14. O2 is not too bad. So this right here would indicate to me probably carbon buildup, timing issue, or high possibility of lazy O2 sensor. So let's take a look. Okay, kind of the same thing. Keep in mind ignition, vacuum leak, carburetor. We don't have a carburetor, but we do have fuel injection, so that might be an issue. Poor cylinder sealing, injector issue, or improper timing. So after the first test, we went ahead and tested the vehicle, and the vehicle did have a lazy O2. So if you guys are aware, here in California, we do propane enrichment tests. So we did a propane enrichment test. Oxygen sensor needs to switch from rich to lean. Lean to rich within 100 milliseconds or less. This one did not, so it failed the actual test. Oxygen sensor was replaced, and then we reran a test. So this is our first after repair test. Vehicle still failing for NOx. It's a little bit lower. CO2 came up just a tad. Oxygen is at 0. So we continue to check further. What we decided to do at this point, since the O2 was bad in the beginning, it could have caused some damage to the converter. So we did a cranking CO2 test on the converter. After that test, we determined that the converter was weak. Because the catalytic converter was weak, we decided to go ahead and replace it. Customer approved it, so we went ahead and replaced the converter, and then we reran the test. Check it out. So after we reran the test, we got NOx down to 320 ppm. CO was at 0.11, hydrocarbons 46, and CO2 was at 14.7. So again, as I always teach in my classes, is putting all the pieces together, like I've heard from many other instructors, and I've learned from one instructor in general, Brandon Steckler and Jim Morton, is you want to put all the pieces together in order for you to solve the problem. So by us being able to piece it all together using a 5-gas, we were able to narrow it down step by step and then get the vehicle actually repaired. She actually said that the vehicle was running like a champ, and haven't heard anything since then. Okay. And the next one I'm going to play, hopefully you guys can hear this. Okay. This is if you guys don't follow me on TikTok, I do 1-minute TikTok videos on diagnostics, sometimes some dumb stuff. And most of the time it's on some good educational stuff that's going to help you guys with specific issues. This one TikTok I did a couple weeks ago, this was on my own personal vehicle. It was a 2014 Scion XP. No check engine light. I had very poor fuel economy. I was getting about 180 miles to a full tank. And prior to this, the vehicle had progressively begun degrading MPGs. Before all this situation occurred, the vehicle was usually doing roughly about 25, 26 miles per gallon and slowly started coming down. And when I finally decided to check it, it was at 180 miles to the tank. Okay, so let me show you guys the video. Hopefully you guys can hear this. and then I'll go over it, or I'll pause it as we go along. Are you struggling with your MPGs? Today's car is a 2014 Scion XP, where the customer's complaint is low fuel economy. So I'm going to show you guys how to use a 5-gas analyzer, a VE test, to determine the cause of this problem and how we fixed it. Okay, so I used my 5-gas as a baseline test because I wanted to see what are the emissions coming out of the tailpipe. And then after that, once I had that, then I did some live data, and then that's what led me to a volumetric efficiency test. If you guys don't know what a VE test is, it's basically measuring how well the engine can breathe. Okay, so let me go ahead and continue with this real quick. What would you diagnose with no codes? The car has no trouble code or DTCs. So like I told you guys earlier, as a good specialty technician, one of my specialties is drivability. So I am not afraid of having a car with no codes. And this one didn't have any trouble codes, and it didn't have any pending codes, and there was nothing in mode 6 failing. So there was nothing telling me that there was actually a problem, but there was a problem. Okay, so this is when we have to use our experience, what we're taught, and how to put it together to run some specific tests. Okay, so one of the tests I did is I pulled my 5-gas reading, and then I plugged it into a Lambda calculator. So that's what we're seeing here is a Lambda calculator. Lambda calculator gave me a reading of 0.991. So this is telling me that the vehicle is running rich. In order for me to have stoichiometric air-fuel ratio, 14.7 to 1, I need to be at a lambda of 1.0. Anything below 1.0 indicates a rich condition, and anything above 1.0 indicates a lean condition. Okay, so here, the vehicle is, the effect of the problem is creating a rich condition. Okay, this is not the cause. And this is where a lot of technicians get in trouble. What I mean by that is the effect of the problem is a rich condition. The problem is not a rich condition. Okay, so most technicians will say, oh, this vehicle is running rich. Let me figure out what's causing rich condition. So they start looking at engine coolant temp sensors, leaking fuel injectors, but that's not the problem. The problem is the vehicle's running lean, and you're getting a rich condition because the computer's compensating for that particular lean condition. Let's keep watching. My 5-gas through a Lambda calculator, I can see the car's running rich and also have a high amount of unburned fuel, as hydrocarbons is 180. As a verification test, I ran secondary ignition, and it's also showing me a rich condition. So I went ahead and used my lap scope with a paddle probe on top of the coils, and all 4 coils were showing me a rich condition burn time. So this was just telling me, okay, cool, this thing really is running rich. So now we need to figure out what sensor is underestimating, or what is skewed that's causing this vehicle to have a rich condition. Let's continue. The next thing I did is I ran a VE test, and it came back at 74%. A VE test at 74% says to check mass airflow and also to make sure how your fuel trims are doing. Are you struggling with your MPGs? Oops. Okay, so I did a VE test, volumetric efficiency test. This test is really easy to run. All you're going to do is put your scan tool in the car, and you're going to graph RPM, mass airflow, and go for a test drive. So what you're looking for is you're going to start the car, let go of the brake, let the car coast, and then just gun it wide open. And right after it switches gear to second gear, you're going to measure how much was your peak RPM and peak mass airflow reading. You're going to plug it into a VE calculator. I like the one from atg.com. Also, the one from the drivability guys is freaking awesome. Okay. And then that gave me a reading of 74%. So this means that that's the fuzzy area. It's basically, does the car have a drivability concern? And the concern was no, it was driving fine. The problem was it was fuel consumption. Okay. So I knew that it wasn't going to be an actual breathing problem. So at that point is you're directed to look at fuel trims, and I had a total trim of 13%. So this thing was running super lean. Okay, so at that point I did a idle scan of my MAF, and my MAF was underestimating by a good amount. So we pulled it off, cleaned it, put it back on, and it changed just a tad bit, but didn't change enough. Reran the VE test, still showed the same. So I considered replacing it, ordered a new one, a new Denso unit, installed it, reran all my tests, and boy, did that MPGs come up like a champ. Let's continue. How your fuel trims are doing. Fuel trims on this one showed positive, which also leads to a faulty mass airflow. I tested the map. It was only showing 1.8 grams per second at idle and should be 3 grams per second at idle. Replace the map, cleared the adaptives, and that's our MPG. So after we replaced it, drove it around, cleared adaptives, I got it back up to 25.1 miles an hour, probably within about miles per gallon, within about 5 miles of driving it outside of the actual shop. And no offense, but check this one out. Put your parts cannon away. So put your parts cannon away. If you guys are throwing parts at cars, you need to stop that, okay? Because that's not diagnosing, that's not repairing, that's guessing. Okay, we call that swaptronics. All right, so that's the reason why we put this class together, so you guys can learn how to use a 5-gas analyzer, be able to do some good diagnosing, and be able to solve those problems before you guys run into any type of situation outside in the shop, and then you got an upset customer. And that's it, guys. So I really appreciate everybody being on here today. I'm going to open this up for if anybody has any questions. Please go ahead and put them in the comments. I'll go ahead and answer any questions that anybody might have. That was it, ladies and gentlemen. I really appreciate you guys being on here today. Once we're done with this, I'm going to fix this video up, brush it up a little bit because I know there was a big pause in the middle when my computer turned off for some weird reason. So I'll go ahead and edit this video, and then I'll put this back up on YouTube and Podia so that this way you guys will be able to watch it at your leisure whenever you'd like. Like I said at the beginning, guys, we are Master Automotive Training. We are working to better the automotive industry one technician at a time, and this starts with you. I appreciate you being on here today. Hope this information really helps you guys understand how easy it is to use a 5-gas analyzer for emission diagnosing and repair. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and hope to see you guys soon in a class, either me presenting it, you presenting it, or we're in a presentation together watching the same information. So I hope you guys enjoyed this information. Thank you so much for being on here, and you guys have a wonderful night. Thank you so much.